and welcome to Superintendents Roundtable. I'm Deborah Vinsel, the CEO here at Thurston Community Media. Periodically, we invite the superintendents from the 4 largest school districts in Thurston County to join us here at the Roundtable to talk about education in our community. It's the first Roundtable of 2024, and we're pleased to have with us again the superintendents from Olympia, North Thurston, Yelm, and Tumwater Schools. To my left is Deborah Clemens from the North Thurston Public Schools, Patrick Murphy from the Olympia School District, Kevin Bogatin from the Tumwater Schools, and Chris Woods from the Yelm Community Schools. So I had to take a second there because we still have 2 new faces here, and I had to think about that for a second. So welcome. It's a new year, and we all know that, and thank you for taking time to come and join us again. So January is the beginning of the Washington State legislative session. There are things coming up in the next couple of months with bond issues and levy issues. Obviously, we're about halfway through the school year, so we've had a chance to kind of settle in, so we have a lot to talk about. But let's start with the February special election measures, what's coming up on February 13th. Why don't we start with you, Chris?
Sure. Yeah, in Yelm, we will be running a measure for a levy and a replacement levy, and my colleagues are going to talk about many different components of how those levy dollars are used. And I think one way that we're using those dollars that is newer is to address social, emotional, and mental health needs. During the pandemic, we saw a tremendous rise in need for services and support, and that need hasn't changed even though that we're on the other side of the pandemic. And so one of the ways that we'll be using those funds, if approved, is to provide contracted services and also staffing for our students. We're recognizing that the need is great, and last year the superintendent in Yelm, Brian Wharton, started meeting with student representatives to talk about issues that were coming up, and the number one issue for them was wanting to know what mental health supports there were and how do they access them. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on, about what we're doing. But I think what's important to take away is that we'll be using some of those levy dollars to help support our students in that way.
Okay. Kevin.
Yeah, we all have an EP&O, an educational program operation levy on this upcoming election. And, we're super grateful that our community has been really supportive of EP&O levies in the past. And so we don't take that for granted, but they are essential to the operation of our school district. And I know we can go into a lot of details of how that is, but it is funding a lot of essential programs. It also goes above and beyond that. Athletics and co-curricular activities, the state doesn't fund any of that, so our levies are responsible to help provide those opportunities for kids. And we know just how essential. We talk about mental health, yes, important. We know that sports, activities, athletics, music, drama, all of those things play a critical role in providing that kind of support for within each other. And so our levy dollars go to some of those essential functions as well.
So are either of you asking for levy increases or just replacement of existing?
Just a replacement of existing in Yelm.
Mm-hmm.
I believe all of us are doing a replacement levy at $2.50 per thousand.
Okay, cool. Patrick, Olympia?
Yeah, I'd probably just kind of attach myself to those two statements. The levy is kind of started changing the wording around it to be an enrichment levy after the McCleary fix, and it really isn't enrichment. It's the basic things that we do in our schools that our families expect every day. I think people expect us to have co-curricular activities and athletics. It's about 16 to 17% of our budget. It's like 1 out of every $6 that we spend, and it's really paying for things that not only are expected, but in some cases are federally mandated, like special education. So you might remember last time, Deb, we were talking about how special education is not fully funded. Well, where do we end up paying for that? We pay for it out of our local levy. In the Olympia School District, historically, we've been funding about $8 to $10 million subsidizing special education through our local levy. During the last legislative session, they made some inroads into that. You might recall we talked about some of the problems with special education funding for districts is the cap, the artificial cap, and the multiplier. And just as a reminder, the cap is they say, we'll only pay for a certain percentage of your students that receive special education services. It was 13.5%. They moved it up to 15%, which is very important. It got us some extra money last year. But I believe all of us are over 15%. We're about 18%. If you count our preschool, we're getting close to 20. So that's going to be an important thing they're going to talk about in the legislature. The governor's budget has lifting the cap altogether. But until things like that happen, the levy is critical for us to continue serving our most vulnerable students in our system. So that's a huge part of the levy for us, for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Deb, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, it is a replacement levy, and it just allows us to continue to provide the programming that we currently provide. One thing that has been surprising to people is to know that the state doesn't fully fund positions like nurses. And many children come to our schools with a health plan, and it is important that those plans are administered by a registered nurse. And in North Thurston Public Schools, we have over 23 nurses, but the state funds about 14.
Okay. So I know that often people people just in general don't understand the difference between levies and bonds. There are no bonds on the ballot in February.
So I am not certain. I think Rochester may have a bond on the ballot. I know Rainier has a capital levy in addition to their EP&O levy. Rochester also has an EP&O levy. And then in North Thurston, we have a capital levy. So it's not a bond, but it's a capital levy for safety, technology, and facility improvements. Okay. So a capital levy is used to fund projects that are more expensive than a normal supply or operating cost. It's something that has a longer life, such as a roof, a boiler. For us, technology, upgrading our security system, replacing fire systems, replacing sewer systems. So we also have a capital levy on the ballot.
Anybody else have capital levies on the ballot?
Olympia and Tumwater ran theirs last year.
Okay.
I think Griffin might have one.
Okay.
I think Griffin might as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And Yelm ran a bond 4 years ago and did a lot of those projects that Deb is speaking of.
Okay. So let's transition now to a discussion about what the state could potentially do. We're at the beginning of the legislative season, and it's always exciting to see what comes out of that big marble building down in downtown Olympia. So legislative priorities for the legislature. I know that fully funding special education has been a discussion for a long point. So we can certainly have some conversation about that. But what other kinds of things are, you and other administrators and school boards around the state hoping that the legislature will address? Kevin, do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I think we have lots of hopes. I know in a short session, our hopes are probably a little bit diminished in that and what they're actually going to accomplish. I know from my board, one of the things is transportation has been one of their top priorities. We've really struggled, not just this year, but the last number of years, getting kids to school on time, getting them home on time. So we have kids arriving up to 2 hours late because of transportation. And that's not, fully legislative, but I know that they attempted to make some adjustments around how we fund transportation. It is underfunded. Our levy dollars also go to help get our kids to school every day. And again, seems like an essential function for us to be offering. So for us, that's probably one. Special ed was also one of our school board's number one priorities. We see lagging performance with special education. They just need additional supports to be able to make up some gaps, provide additional opportunities. And so again, that continues to be a priority for the Tumwater School District, and I know for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Patrick.
Our board actually talked about a resolution last night for our legislative priorities. I think we all have very similar things, like you said, around special education. We started talking about our levies. I think one of the things we're pushing for is change to some of the levy language. One of the things that happened after McCleary was we couldn't collect the amounts that we did before, even though our communities would pass that. There's language around how we get the lesser amount between student enrollment versus per $1,000 of assessed value. We'd like to see that changed. We would love to see the legislature follow through on feeding all kids. That's another thing that we've asked for as part of our legislative priority. So it's really that prototypical model that is used to fund our schools that just needs to be fully funded. Things like principals, we get a certain amount per a number of kids for principals. They don't fully fund the salaries for those things. So it's all those things that we look to our local levy to offset, which we all think are basically standard operating things we would expect in schools, that if they're not going to fix those things legislatively, then we need to change the levy so we can pay for it locally.
Deb, priorities in North Thurston?
So we have a lot of the same priorities. In addition, around school construction, there's a request to have the school construction assistance program increase the dollar amount per square footage for the state's funding for a school that is 30 years or older, or a school district is qualifying because they have enrollment growth and need to accommodate additional students. So school construction right now for a high school is really over $500 per square foot. You have a lot of specialty spaces in high schools, and the state's match for that is about $150. So there's quite a shortfall. We're hopeful that they will revisit the dollar amount in that formula. The other request, and it's been a standing request both for the State School Directors Association as well as our district, is a simple majority on bonds.
Instead of 60%?
Yes.
Right. How about you, Chris?
Well, I don't want to be a broken record, but I think everything my colleagues have shared, from special education, I still think we're a ways away. As Patrick was indicating, we've made improvements, definitely, but sure, we're still a ways away. I mentioned earlier mental and physical health. Continued work there, and I know our legislature has started and made some contributions in that area, and I know that will be an area of focus. And then basic education funding and staffing allocations. That's huge. Costs for staffing are increasing every year, and we want to be competitive. We want to be competitive with each other so that we're getting the best staff that we can. And we've been talking that our staffing costs are anywhere from 80 to 85, 86% of our budget. And so that's a big need for us. We need our legislators to address the staffing allocations.
I'd like to give an example of the prototypical model because it's a phrase that we're using, but I don't know that a lot of people understand how the state determines the funding. If you take what they consider a typical elementary school, which I think the state has at around 400 students, the state funds almost one paraeducator for that entire school. Our elementary schools in our district run around 20 paraeducators, with 6 or 7 providing support in special education classrooms, and 13 that are providing support for intervention services, recess supervision, before and after school supervision. So they're essential to running an elementary school, but that's just an example of that shortfall.
The general paraeducator allocation for Olympia is about 15 paras for the entire district, and we deploy 42. So again, that's the local levy that's paying for that. It should be part of that prototypical model because our parents expect sidewalks to be monitored. They expect recesses to be supervised, and that takes people, more than one.
Right. So, we've talked about McCleary a little bit in the past, in that it didn't do what people had hoped it would do. So, given the legislative priorities that are, being shared, is there discussion about a complete revisit to that whole mess that was McCleary? And
I think there's been discussion around the funding for salaries. I think that one of the hopes that we all have is that special education will continue to receive more funding, because all of us are providing the support our students need, and the state is not fully funding special education. So we look for what are the common denominators across all school districts, and all school districts would benefit from those kinds of increases.
So there are some areas where the legislature really could take a
like
really significant change to how things are currently structured.
To remove the cap on special education would be an example.
I know our local legislators are looking at how specific districts are funded, and so there's this idea of regionalization. Again, as a new person coming in, and I'm trying to understand some districts getting additional funding because of kind of where they're located in parts of our state. And again, I kind of come from Tumwater, very close to our neighbors. Yelm, my neighbor here, gets regionalization. So there's additional funding that goes to Yelm, and you kind of think, well, what is the difference between North Thurston, Olympia, Tumwater, and Yelm? Not much in terms of cost of living, housing costs, yet we're not funded the same. And so that's a frustration, I think, for Tumwater, I think for a lot of our districts in the state. And so I think and asking for our legislator to revisit some of that, and maybe, again, times have changed. I think cost of living, some exponential growth in certain areas of housing costs and such. So it's probably worth looking at and how we are probably funding that. I know we always are comparing ourselves to King County and some of the Seattle, and again, a bit of frustration that they get significant more funding and some legislative priorities that may give them additional more funding in this upcoming session.
Yeah. And I guess I would just add to the special education piece, the number of students that are requiring specially designed instruction is increasing tremendously every year. And so more and more students are needing that specially designed instruction, individual plans to help them be successful, and those numbers are growing. And that's all tied into that social, emotional, mental health piece as well. And so the more that we can fund special education, the more that we can provide everything that these students need and not rely on our levies to pay for those essential functions.
Okay. What's going on in your districts? Update on initiatives and programs for the year. Patrick, you get to start with this one.
Yeah, well, the really big thing that we're talking about in the Olympia School District right now is our enrollment situation, our facilities within our district, and just having a very serious conversation around the efficiency of our facilities based on the number of kids that we have. This is something that preceded me in this role. Previous superintendents have talked about it. Previous boards have talked about it. We have right around 9,300 headcount students in the school district. If you compare us to other districts our size, we have a lot more schools than other districts our size have. We have 19 schools in our school district, and if we were on average with the other districts that we were compared to, we'd probably have about between 2 or 3 less schools. We've gone down in enrollment since our high water mark in 2019-20. We're down about 750 kids district-wide. And when you run really small schools, 750 kids can be like 3 schools in our district. That's 750 is a little over 5% of our overall enrollment. The bulk of that is at elementary. Of those 750, about 570 of those kids' differential is at the elementary level. And it really is majority attributed to lower birth rates and smaller kindergarten cohorts coming in. Now, I think maybe we've talked about this before, but millennials and Generation Z are having fewer kids and having them later in life. You can go and check out Thurston County's birth rates in their health department, and it's a fact of life. Housing is playing a part in that too, the cost of housing. We just got done saying that we're all very similar, but if you're going to buy a new home, which is where most people that are starting a new family want to raise them in a single family home, it's expensive in the Olympia School District, and there's not a lot of land to do it. We're a very compacted area, and so most of the housing that's being built in Olympia has gone from single family homes to multi-family apartments, a lot of 55 and older and places like that just don't generate kids. And so that's just a really, really hard conversation because people love their schools. And we've talked about it in our community that this entire conversation isn't about which school is better, because all of our schools are outstanding. And they're just pillars of their community. So it's just incredibly hard. As you know, Deb, we've had some board meetings with lots of people, and there'll be more. But we're going to hopefully come to a decision sometimes in March about whether or not we might consolidate some schools moving forward, and that's going to be really, really hard. The idea is that when you have smaller schools based on this prototypical model, it's really expensive to run them. We don't get enough. That 400 kid prototypical model doesn't pay for a principal in the Olympia school. I don't think it pays in any of our districts because we pay more than the prototypical model. I think it takes 450 kids in Olympia to generate one principal. We only have one school that reaches that size. So this is an important conversation. It's probably a long overdue conversation in many ways, but the enrollment decline has really pushed it. Legislative things could help. But at some point, we really do in Olympia have to decide, how many schools, given the enrollment that we have and the revenue that it generates, is appropriate for us to fully resource our schools so that all of these things that we're talking about, paraeducators, principals, social emotional supports, teachers, that are offering various supports, it's harder to do that in a small school, and we have a lot of them. So that's the biggest thing that we've been talking about, and most people are very aware of that, and we'll continue to think thoughtfully through that and go through that process.
It's a challenging conversation.
Incredibly challenging.
Yeah. And the Olympia School District, Olympia in general, is kind of landlocked, whereas Yelm and Tumwater and the North Thurston, there's urban growth boundaries where there's room to spread out, whereas the city of Olympia, not so much.
Not so much.
Yeah. Deb, how about new initiatives or programs coming up in North Thurston?
So I think I'll focus a little on the instructional side. I had mentioned in the past that we are engaged in one of the largest national studies around the science of reading. The project's we call it MTSSR, and it's reading instruction on foundational literacy skills. And our board of directors hosted a community conversation, heard from staff, heard from parents, experts, community partners, and made a board determination going forward. We just yesterday actually had our first ELA/social studies adoption meeting. All of our elementary teachers and parents and community members who are part of that committee had their big kickoff meeting. We're excited because the work what we've learned from the MTSSR study is that through direct instruction, following the science of reading, we are helping children learn to read at greater rates, faster rates than we have in the past. So building off of that as a foundation for this preschool through 5th grade ELA adoption, we're also adopting a social studies curriculum because we need the content for students to be able to practice, their comprehension. So we had the kickoff meeting yesterday, and I was telling the director, I said I stepped out because there was all of this noise coming out of the boardroom, and it was all of the teachers engaged in conversation about this new adoption. So they're pretty excited about it.
That's great. Now, just because acronyms happen and we don't know what ELA is?
English Language Arts.
English Language Arts. Okay,
yes.
Just so everybody knows.
Yes.
Okay, how about in Yelm?
Well, I mentioned earlier about social, emotional, mental health. Along with that, I think one thing that we are all trying to do a better job of is listening to student voice. And I think we're all trying to be very intentional about getting accurate and timely feedback from our students about things that we can improve on, things we're doing well. And I mentioned earlier one area that was identified last year with Brian Wharton and a student supervisory group, and I said that they had mentioned they wanted to know what mental health services were available and how to access them. Well, we realized that was a gap for us in our district. We had many services, but were they organized in a way that our students could access them in a timely manner? So we have created a Google Classroom, which has been advised by our students, developed by our students. Our staff are supporting them in creating this model. We have launched it at our high school with our 9th through 12th graders with a student video on how to access it, how to sign up, how to use it, everything from social, emotional, mental support, drug and alcohol counseling, how do I access my counselor, who do I go to if it's Saturday night at midnight and I'm having really a difficult time and wondering, how do I solve these problems? Maybe it's depression, maybe it's even thinking about suicide. So we're trying to develop this tool that can be accessed by our students and families any time of the day. And so that has been launched at our high school, and we're now working with both middle schools to fine-tune the Google Classroom, and it is tailored to each grade. So each grade has their own Google Classroom that they can register for and sign into and access 24 hours a day, and also gives us information that we need to help support them moving forward. And there's also the ability to stay anonymous for students that need to report situations. And so we're very pleased about this work that's going on, most importantly because it was driven by our students.
Mm-hmm. Great. That's an exciting one. I like that.
Yeah.
How about you, Kevin?
First I want to start just by, January is Board Appreciation Month, and so that's for all of us, like, we're super appreciative of our school boards and the volunteer hours they have. So my own board, one of the things that they've really started to focus on, I think they're really tired of the pandemic and all the things that came out of that, and really wanting us to get back to instructional methodology, talking about outcomes for kids. And again, we've looked at our data. We all have room to improve as we start to dissect our data and look at whether it's English language arts or mathematics, and we know we struggle and to get all of our kids to be successful. And so our board is asking to look at more data, and our team and putting some of that. And so we're going to do a really deeper dive into some of our instructional materials. So again, I think like North Thurston, we'll be doing some instructional material adoption in the coming year. I mentioned transportation earlier, and that's an ongoing struggle, and so we're hopeful to put at least some ideas together to improve that. I mean, I really, we can talk about attendance and struggles. If I can't get kids to school on time, it almost feels like, why are we talking about attendance? So we know getting kids to school safely to school every day is a huge priority. And one other thing for Tumwater this year has been a focus on grading. And so what is that? How do we communicate grades? Are they meaningful? Are they accurate? And so we've been spending time on making sure and revisiting what it means to provide grades, and how do we change some of those kind of historic practices that may have not always been accurate in providing an accurate picture of true student assessment. So that's been some work that the district has been going on this last few months, and will continue on throughout the year.
Okay, great. Did I get everybody on that one?
I think you did.
Okay. It's like I sometimes lose track where we are. So, we're, like I said, we're kind of in the middle of the school year. The last time we met here at the roundtable was in September, so there's a lot of water under the bridge, a lot of activities and fun things. So now it's time to talk about the special stories that have touched you over the last few months, in your districts. Deb, I'm going to start with you on this one.
So we are coming back from a break, and for us, Camacha Middle School's construction is almost complete. Yay. So over the break, our teachers are moving into brand new classrooms, and the facility has turned out beautifully. It's a complete modernization of the facility. So it has an expanded gym, new bleachers, it has a new community entrance, has a larger commons area, brand new kitchen. We'll have a new play shed that's still to be constructed, but a better outdoor play space. The students even have pickleball options in that space. And then opening up over the winter break, 2 brand new wings. And so teachers were busy moving into brand new classrooms. We are going to be hosting a ribbon cutting in late January. We have students who will be giving community members a tour of the new school, so that our community can see the return on their investment, because they approved a bond in 2020, and I feel like it's a miracle that project has been completed within budget and on time, despite all of the supply disruptions of the pandemic and labor issues that many construction companies were facing. So we're pretty pleased about it.
Congratulations. Patrick.
I think one of the things that's hard for us as superintendents sometimes is that a lot of the things that we've been talking about today, ballot measures, budget challenges, enrollment situations, that's all really important stuff. but it kind of sort of buffers us from the really, truly important things that are happening every day in our schools. So the more that we can get out into classrooms and see what's going on, the more wonderful my experience is when doing that. There's just been lots of wonderful things happening this year. Deb had a really fun thing right before winter break over at Roosevelt Elementary School where they were reading a story about the gingerbread man, and it was like they were doing all sorts of things at different grade levels, from kindergarten all the way up to 5th grade, about this story about the gingerbread man. And one of the things they do with kindergartners is they put little flower footprints in the hallway that leads to the principal's office, and they find the gingerbread man there. And I mean, just seeing the excitement and just the things that you can't do over Zoom, right? Just being in a school setting and all of the wonderful stuff that's happening around that. We have this really awesome program at Capitol High School around aerospace, fabrication, and manufacturing. And we have kids that are going directly out of high school into like high demand, high paying fields. We're part of 8 schools across the state that are doing that work. It's very cool. One of the things I'm really just so proud of our staff and our students and our families about is we just got our graduation rates for the class of 2023. And we're all coming out of a pandemic. We're dealing with all sorts of challenges. All-time high, the Olympia School District, 92% on-time graduation rate. The Avanti High School has a 100% extended graduation rate of 5 years. You go to Avanti High School, you stay an extra year, you're going to graduate 100%. And we're at these numbers where, you know, when you're talking 92% and 95% and all these different numbers, you're really at a point where your goal should be 100. Okay. And again, I credit our staff that despite everything that's going on, just working incredibly hard. I really believe the graduation rate is a K-12 metric. And so I'm just so thankful for the work of our elementaries and our middle schools and our high schools. Despite all of these things that challenge us every day, they come and bring their competence, their compassion, and their collaboration every day to our kids. So I'm just grateful to serve in this district.
Great. How about you, Kevin?
We aren't too far away from the holiday break, and I'm surprised. If we would have met in December, Chris would have been wearing, I don't know, ugly sweater. Is that offensive to say?
Festive.
I don't know. They weren't all ugly.
Festive.
I got to see festive sweaters, and he wore one every day in the month of December, and so I got to see him in some different meetings. And so part of my sharing is just in that. The last couple weeks before break, my entire boardroom is filled with gifts and clothes and food and all these things for 600 families in our community. Becky Parsons, my executive assistant, helps coordinate that. It's a program that she took over that was started in the community about 20 years ago, and then kind of, I think our foundation took on parts of it, but then she's taken on a lot of it. And so to coordinate this, and there's these gift tags out throughout the entire community. So all these people are super generous and really providing direct support and for some of our neediest kids and families. And I'm sure they're super appreciative and the work that's gone out. And I mean, there's so many different organizations, businesses, community contributing money. At one point, there's thousands of dollars worth of gift cards on our desk one day. I mean, just that people are donating, and these groups and companies are organizing and donating to the community. So I think we're just really grateful. I think we see that there's so much giving from families and our community to support kids and families, and I think those are things that just touch all of us, and we're super grateful. And I got to see a few families accepting these boxes and just in tears and how grateful that they are for that support. So again, that's probably something that just comes to my mind so closely after the holidays.
Mm-hmm. Chris?
You know, I want to highlight a special group of staff members that we have and an amazing partnership we have with the Yelm Police Department. We are fortunate to have 3 school resource officers. Officer Don Moody just retired on December 15th. He was in Yelm for about 20 years, and most of the time as a school resource officer. I got to see the board acknowledge him. I got to go to many staff meetings where they acknowledged him. There were tears. It was very hard for people to say goodbye to Don. We're all very excited and happy for him, but he was part of our family, and he even said Yelm Community Schools is his family. And one of our other resource officers, Avery Ford, she is also our bowling coach. So during the day, she's a school resource officer in our schools, like another staff member, building relationships. And after school, she coaches our girls' bowling team. And she tells the story of how bowling helped her when she was growing up, kind of gave her an outlet and a place to be, rather than doing other things and making poor choices. And then lastly, Chris Seymour. He has just been selected as Officer of the Year for 2023 in Yelm. And these are our school resource officers. They are staff members just like our food service workers, our paraeducators, our teachers, our bus drivers, custodial staff. They just might wear a different uniform, but they are part of our family. And I think it's pretty amazing, all three of these people, and the impact that they've made on our community. And so I think it was important to highlight the special partnership and relationship we have with them.
Great. Well, I want to thank you all for taking time, for being with us at this first 2024 Superintendents Roundtable. I know we have another one planned for later in the year. Looking forward to seeing what comes out of the legislative process, so we'll all keep an eye on that. But again, we're so appreciative that you've taken your time to be with us today. So it was good to see you again, and Happy New Year.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
If you're the parent of a school-age child or a preschool child, read with your child 20 minutes a day. It's one of the best things you can do to prepare them for their education. And while you're at it, throw in some simple counting games to get them a little bit interested in math too. If you're the parent of a school-age child, get involved with your school's education, with your child's education in their school. There are lots of ways that you can participate. Talk to your child's principal or teacher, or go onto their website to see what volunteer opportunities might be available. Our community is generous. Remember that with our upcoming levies in February. Whatever you decide, we do encourage you to be a voter. Get your ballot, fill it out, turn it back in. It's important. Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Superintendents Roundtable. We'll see you again in the spring.